It seems behind closed doors, Ukraine may already have permission to use Western missiles in Russia. Once they get access to these destructive weapons, they already have key targets in mind that will completely change the face of this war. So today, we'll go over what the top missile target that will inflict the most damage on the Russian army is: the Kerch Bridge. What Putin is doing in defense of those areas and what the US's silent role in these missile attacks is. Zelensky has been hard at work trying to get permission to use long-range missiles from the West because Ukraine is planning wide-scale attacks on select Russian territories. Currently, the use of these missiles has been very limited as Ukraine is forced to use air-launched Storm Shadow missile from the UK and the ground-launched Atacoms from the US to carry out strikes on military installations and infrastructure inside its Russian-occupied territories. Kiev argues that being able to use the weapons outside of Ukraine will help to weaken Russia's ability to strike within Ukraine, as it will be forced to focus elsewhere. At a meeting with top US military leaders, Zelensky said, "We need to have this long-range capability, not only on the divided territory of Ukraine, but also on the Russian territory, so that Russia is motivated to seek peace. We need to make Russian cities and even Russian soldiers think about what they need: peace or Putin." Reporting on developments in Russia and Ukraine has been keeping us busy, but we need your help. Sometimes, our videos get swallowed up because of the algorithm and anti-Putin bots, but giving this video a like helps to keep our content up. Let's get straight into the video. Ukraine sees the ability to use long-range missiles as a game-changer for the war. If Kiev can strike behind enemy lines, it will be able to target air bases, supply depots, and communication centers hundreds of miles over the border. Taking out air bases is important because it will reduce Russia's air superiority and weaken the supply lines they use for daily airstrikes against Ukraine. The Kremlin has been taking out major military installations in Ukraine, and this has increased the urgent need for Ukraine's ability to strike back. Canada's Defense Minister Bill Blair is in support of this and said, "One of the things President Zelensky and his ministers have made very clear to us is that they're suffering significant attacks from air bases and military installations located within Russia." Let us now dive deep into Ukraine's military strategy for the upcoming months. When Kiev finally gets approval to launch its long-range missiles, it is clear what its first target will be. Crimea holds so much political and military significance, it is no surprise that Zelensky wishes to reclaim the territory first. The Ukrainian president has always been clear about the fact that that is the goal, saying, "This war, which began with Russia's occupation of our Crimea with an attempt to seize Donbass, must end precisely there, in the liberated Crimea and the liberated cities of Donbass, with our troops reaching the state border of Ukraine. We have always kept this goal in mind. We do not forget about it." Kiev has also made its intentions quite clear with some of the military strikes that Ukraine has carried out on the Kerch Bridge. A pro-Kiev military partisan group commented saying, "The Kerch Bridge is living its final days." Kiev despises the bridge because it symbolizes a significant loss on Ukraine's side and is of great strategic importance for resupply for Russia. The important bridge, also known as the Crimean Bridge, was opened in 2018 by Putin and was intended to be used as a critical supply route for Russia's forces. At the opening ceremony for the bridge, Putin personally drove a truck over the bridge and led a convoy to commemorate its opening. He hailed the successful building of the bridge and stated that it makes Crimea and legendary Sevastopol even stronger, and all of us are even closer to each other. The bridge covers the Kerch Strait and connects the Taman Peninsula, which is Krasnodar Krai, to Crimea. It spans about 11.8 miles and was built as a dual-function bridge with a 4-lane highway and a double-track railway. Construction of the bridge started in 2014, right after the annexation of Crimea, and it cost approximately $7.5 billion to make. The invasion of Crimea began in February 2014 when thousands of extra Russian soldiers were secretly sent to bases in Crimea that were permitted to Russian soldiers. On the 28th of February, soldiers set up checkpoints at Armyansk and Chongar, where the two main roads crossed from mainland Ukraine to Crimea. Though there was no bloodshed, the act was considered an act of violence by Ukraine. The final and complete annexation happened on the 2nd of March, when tough-looking soldiers took over the Ukrainian military bases and carried in the latest Russian military weapons while dressed in regular clothes with no national or unit markings. After ignoring international outcry and solidifying his position, Putin went straight into making the region part of Crimea by building the bridge that served as a link. After laying low and not acting on the matter for years, in 2023, Ukraine launched an attack on the Russian bridge over the Kerch Strait. This was one of its first key strategic attacks on an important route linking Russia with Crimea. This incident was the second time that the structure was hit, signaling that Crimea is a prime target for Ukraine. Reports from Russia claim that marine-based drones were used in the attack, which left 2 people dead. The first attack on the bridge happened in October 2022. Although the causes were not known, the Kremlin attributes it to Ukraine. The attack blew up the bridge as a fuel truck exploded, and 2 spans of the road crossing in the direction of Crimea collapsed. A fire also engulfed a train of fuel trucks on another part of the bridge, which collapsed. Russian President Vladimir Putin called the bridge blast a terrorist attack and said that the organizers and executors were Ukrainian special services. Currently, the bridge is in need of urgent repairs and cannot survive any more structural damage. Its delicate condition could be the end for Putin, as Ukraine will definitely be striking the bridge again when it has the artillery it needs. For most of the war from 2022, Putin was using the bridge as a traffic route for Crimea, which has been his launchpad for his invasion of Ukraine. From there, the Kremlin has been launching regular airstrikes and missiles are constantly flying over the Black Sea. The Kerch Bridge is important because of what it means politically and symbolically for Russia and Putin, who has called Crimea Russia's Holy Land. Crimea has helped to drive Russia's occupation in southern Ukraine, and the Kremlin has packed it with land-based missile systems used on Ukrainian cities and towns. From a strategic point, the Kerch Bridge gives Crimea control over the Kerch Strait and connects the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov, which helps Putin to maintain dominance of the seas. The Black Sea is important to Putin because it hosts his sea fleet, which is used in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The Kremlin has used the bridge as a strategic fortress and has been able to blockade adversaries from entering Crimea. Russia has the best of both worlds, as it also uses the railroad track to carry supplies to forces in Kherson and other hubs in Crimea. The bridge is used to facilitate the deployment of troops, as well as the heavy military presence that is around the bridge communicates who is in charge. This crossover is such a logistical masterpiece because it quickens the movement of equipment and troops, allowing Russia to constantly be firing at Ukraine. With all of these advantages, we need to point out that the bridge is not just important for attacks on the ground. It's also vital because its location is near air defense systems, which helps Russia too. The bridge's proximity to Sevastopol is also of strategic importance. Sevastopol is one of Russia's main ports and naval bases, which gives access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. While it has numerous military uses, the port is important because it is an integral nexus for trade with North Africa and the Middle East. This means that the Kremlin's protection of Crimea is also, so that they protect an integral part of their goods supply. While protecting their trade networks, Moscow was also able to disrupt trade between Europe and Ukraine. With more control in the region, Putin was able to stop trade with Ukraine and focus on growing his influence. Now, although the Kerch Bridge and Crimea are of strategic importance to Russia, there is a big sentimental element to why Putin continues to hold on to it. But before, as you guys know, YouTube has a habit of restricting my videos. And sometimes it's not even YouTube's fault, it's the brands that run ads on YouTube. They don't want their ads next to controversial videos, so they tell YouTube to restrict controversial videos like mine that cover geopolitics. That means sometimes we have to forgo covering certain news topics because we know YouTube will restrict that video. But often, those controversial topics are important news that you guys ought to know about. That's why we launched Global Recaps, our own geopolitics newsletter. Every day we send an email directly to your inbox covering the world's most important news. And there is no third party censoring any topic. If it's important, it will be in the email so you guys can know all about it. These are short and simple emails that take 5 minutes to read. News topics covered in the emails are unbiased, uncensored, and completely free. So sign up now using the QR code on the screen or using the link in the description and become more knowledgeable about the world you live in. Crimea is central to his narrative that Ukraine is a part of Russia, which is why it was the first territory to be annexed. Putin has always believed that it was his right to annex Crimea, and he has a desire to bring Russia back to its former imperial glory. He believes he will be honoring all of the greats before him by taking back the Crimean Peninsula and rewriting all the wrongs done to Russia. Putin's patriotic love for Mother Russia runs so deep, he believes that it has the right to rule over East Germany and Central and Eastern Europe. Putin's crazy dream about Crimea is very old and dates back to 1783, when Catherine the Great annexed the territory from the Ottoman Empire. We're going to take a short history detour here to discuss the Russian obsession with something that has been called the Crimean myth. In 1954, the Communist Party redefined the Soviet Union borders, and Crimea was transferred from the jurisdiction of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The region was still under the control of Russia, but technically Ukrainian territory. This still meant that Crimea was under the control of the Kremlin, but technically a part of Ukraine. After the Cold War, when the Soviet Union collapsed, things became official, and the Western territories gave Crimea to Ukraine. This move did not sit well with Russia, which has always believed that Crimea belonged to the Kremlin after it was unfairly given to Ukraine in 1954. Russia also believes this because the majority of people in Crimea are of Russian ethnicity. For Putin, the taking of Crimea has always been a blow to the sense of national pride. Coming all the way from imperial times, the Russian national identity is built on Russian superiority over other nations. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, egos were shattered. This national feeling was proven by independent polls in 2018 that showed that 86% of Russians were in support of the annexation of Crimea. The return to Crimea, therefore, represents a reigniting of Russian identity and glory. In a speech that he gave in 2014, Putin said, "In Crimea, literally everything is permeated with our history and pride. Crimea is a unique fusion of cultures and traditions, and in this way, it is so similar to Russia." Crimea, in the hearts and minds of people, has been and remains an integral part of Russia. Towards the end of his address, he expressed how he truly felt about Crimea going to Ukraine, saying, "In 1991, Crimea was handed over to Ukraine like a sack of potatoes, because Russia was in such a difficult condition that it could not protect its interests." What Putin did in 2014 also benefited his political reputation. The annexation bettered his political position and made him popular with the masses. The annexation was proof that he could return Russia to its former glory, and that is why he had support of the masses at the beginning of his invasion of Ukraine. Now that we understand why Crimea is so precious to Putin, we can discuss why losing Crimea would mean that Putin would lose the war. Ukraine's recapture of the Crimean Peninsula would do more than shift the tide. It would require Putin and the Kremlin to rethink the war completely. Rafat Chubarov, a Crimean Tatar leader, said, "This Ukrainian territory is extremely important for Putin. This is the question of his life, and not only political. Therefore, it is clear that Russia, especially at the stage of inevitable defeat, will stimulate all of its agents and all of its forces in order to keep Crimea for itself." Already, the major disadvantage of the Kerch Bridge is the fact that it is a single point of failure. A lot of vital networks will go up in flames if Ukraine is successful, leaving Putin with no starting point in recovering ground. Once Ukraine is able to take out the Kerch Bridge with long-range missiles, the rest of Crimea will be a walk in the park. Attacks on the bridge also affect Putin's control of Sevastopol, which would mean a halt to economic trade as well. This is not good news, considering that Russia is already struggling to push exports into the global market. After Ukraine knocks out the bridge, taking back Crimea will be easier. We can tell from the discussion that we had earlier that without the region, Russia would lose the convenience of easily moving tanks and weapons to the front lines. Ukraine has already begun to deal deadly blows in Crimea, with satellite imagery confirming damage to Russian radar installations, electronic warfare assets, logistics routes, and airfields. Justin Bronk, a senior research fellow for air power and technology at the Royal United Services Institute in London, said, "It is definitely fair to say the Ukrainians have had pretty impressive successes over the past couple of months. Crimea may be the key to end the war, but it could also be the end of Putin's reign. If he loses Crimea, all the promises that he has been making to the Russian people will be unmet, and that would affect his image. As more casualties roll in and soldiers and commanders experience loss after loss, they will be pointing fingers at their once indestructible leader. Currently, the Russian people are also suffering economic strain because of the sanctions and the growing defense budget. Another loss, like that of a region that brought them a sense of pride, will only send them off the rails and destabilize Putin's control. Collectively, Russia's self-image will be destroyed, and this loss could put an end to the belief in the Crimean myth. Such a victory would also be monumental for Zelensky, as it would also prove to the world that Putin is not the scary leader he pretends to be. Ukraine has been working hard to turn the tides, and these new permissions that are about to be given by the West to use long-range missiles will change everything. While Crimea has the most strategic value as a target, we are going to discuss other regions that could get some missile action. The region of Kursk is an important site for Kiev because it is the first region in western Russia that Ukraine invaded. In August, Kiev launched its incursion into Kursk and took over 500 square miles while capturing 100 Russian towns and villages in a short space of time. Kursk's proximity to Moscow makes it a weak spot, as a missile attack in the area would likely impact the capital city too. Logistically, Kursk is a supply hub for the Russian military because it has good rail and road connections within it. Military bases like the 6th Combined Arms Army are a part of the Western Military District, which means that Ukraine could potentially attack the region to take out the troops in that area. On a symbolic level, launching missiles to the Kursk region would be vindication for Kiev, and this would show Russia that it can go toe-to-toe on the battlefield. Moving on, another potential site for the attack could be the Kavkaz port in Krasnodar, Russia. There have been reports of Ukraine using American ammunitions in the region, and although this has not been confirmed, the claims are probably true. The port is strategically placed because it is near the city of Krasnodar on the Sea of Azov. It connects Russia to the Black Sea and allows naval vessels to reach the Mediterranean Sea. Ukraine choosing this as a missile target could cause some real problems for Russia, because this would mean that important naval bases nearby and sea fleets would be wiped out. We should also mention Belgorod, because with all the reports of bombing coming from this southern Russia region, we can see that Ukraine has its eye there. The Ukrainian army has been using artillery and drones to target this site that is near the southern border of Russia. Another reason why it makes a good target is that there are air bases that are situated in the area that have Russian Su-34 and Su-35 fighter jets, which Ukraine would be happy to have out of the skies. Logistically, Belgorod has a highway that connects Moscow to Kharkiv. If Ukraine could take out this area, it could cut off part of Russia's access to the Kharkiv region. Ukraine's strategy could also be to hit the Kremlin's pockets based on recent drone attacks on an oil depot near Polotarsk, Russia. Satellite imagery shows that a fire broke out and large parts of the land were burned out. Ukraine could also decide to hit more oil depots around Russia, and this would have devastating circumstances. With so many good targets to choose from, Ukraine is going to have fun trying to decide which targets make sense. This also means that Putin will be very busy putting out fires in every region of Russia. Strategically, Ukraine's attack on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea is enough to put an end to Putin. So much of Russia's war efforts in Ukraine rest on the operations in Crimea, and the Kremlin has been building its strategy from here. If Ukraine is finally able to reclaim the territory, this means that all of Putin's efforts and strategy from 2014 will be turned into nothing. As we wait to see how the White House responds to Zelensky's negotiations, we can hope that things will start looking up for Ukraine.